They replaced me 3 days after the CEO died. 15 years at the company. 15 years of building systems that didn't break, clients that didn't leave, teams that didn't fall apart when things went wrong. And 3 days after his funeral, I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room while the CFO smiled at me like we were discussing lunch plans. "We've decided to move in a different direction," he said, effective immediately. I already knew what was coming. The nephew had been circling for months. They didn't even pretend it was about performance. That was the part that still amazed me. No warning, no improvement plan, no manufactured mistakes pulled from thin air. Just honesty, wrapped in arrogance. "He does a lot more than you already," the CFO continued, folding his hands on the table. "He brings fresh energy, new ideas. He deserves the role." I nodded slowly, as if I were considering his words instead of cataloging them. The nephew sat 2 seats down, trying very hard not to look pleased. 26 years old, business degree, 1 internship, unlimited confidence. He'd been introduced to the company as someone we're grooming for leadership, which usually meant I was expected to clean up after him quietly. Now, apparently, I was the obstacle. "I see," I said. My voice didn't shake. That seemed to disappoint them. "We appreciate everything you've done for the company," the CFO added, already reaching for the folder in front of him. "HR will walk you through the exit process. Severance, benefits, all standard." Standard. That word always gets used when people are trying to make something unfair sound inevitable. I looked around the room. Same table I'd sat at every Monday morning for over a decade. Same view of the city I'd watched change while I stayed late fixing problems no one else wanted to own. I remembered the CEO sitting in this exact chair, tapping his pen when he was thinking. He would have hated this, but he wasn't here anymore. And they knew it. "I want to say congratulations," I said, turning toward the nephew. His head snapped up, surprised. "You have big shoes to fill," I continued calmly. "I hope the transition goes smoothly." The CFO raised an eyebrow. "That's very professional of you, Maria." "I care about the company," I replied. "I always have." That part was true, just not in the way they thought. They slid the papers across the table. Termination without cause. Effective immediately. My role eliminated. Access revoked by end of day. The language was clean, efficient, and careless. They didn't notice my hands didn't tremble when I signed. HR escorted me back to my office like I was a visitor who had overstayed her welcome. I packed quietly. 15 years fits into surprisingly few boxes when you never decorate because you're always too busy. As I left, the nephew was already in my chair, adjusting the monitor height. "Maria," he called out, standing quickly. "If you have time later this week, maybe you could help me understand some of the ongoing projects?" I smiled. "Of course." That surprised him too. "I'll send you notes," I added. "Whatever helps." They watched me walk out with polite relief. No scene, no argument, no last-minute bargaining, just acceptance. What they didn't know was that the moment they chose termination without cause, they had already lost. I took the elevator down alone. The doors closed, and for the first time since the meeting, I exhaled. Not in panic. In clarity. The buyback clause had been buried in my original employment agreement, signed when the company was still small enough to fit in 2 floors, and ambition mattered more than politics. The CEO himself had insisted on it back then. "If we ever part ways unfairly," he'd said, tapping the contract, "you deserve protection." Termination without cause triggered it automatically. They never amended it, never challenged it, probably forgot it existed. That was their mistake. At home, I placed the box by the door and poured a glass of water I didn't drink. I opened my laptop and pulled up a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were scanned contracts, board resolutions, and one document highlighted in yellow. Buyback option. Clearly defined. Time limited. Enforceable. Monday. They thought they had solved a problem quickly. Removed a loyal employee, promoted family, closed the chapter. I sent a short email that evening. Subject. Transition support? Text. Happy to help ensure continuity this week. Let me know what you need. Maria, friendly. Cooperative. Disarming. Then I called my lawyer. She listened quietly, asked 2 questions, and then said the words I had been waiting to hear. Yes, she said. This is valid. And yes, they triggered it. I looked out the window at the city lights, steady and indifferent. They had replaced me. On Monday, I would remind them what that actually cost. Monday didn't begin with fireworks. It began with emails. At 8:04 a.m., my inbox lit up with polite requests framed as favors. Could I clarify a vendor escalation? Did I remember why a certain compliance exception existed? Where was the documentation for a legacy client's pricing structure? I answered every message calmly, briefly, helpfully. I didn't mention that most of those answers existed only because I'd built the systems myself. Or that the nephew, now officially my replacement, didn't yet understand how much of the company's stability lived in decisions made years ago, quietly, without applause. By mid-morning, he called. Maria, quick question, he said, trying to sound casual. The operations dashboard is throwing warnings. Is that normal? It depends, I replied. Which warnings? Silence. Then paper rustling. The red ones. I closed my eyes for half a second. Those are tied to contract thresholds, I said evenly. If they turn yellow, you're fine. Red means someone's about to breach a service level agreement. Oh, he said. So, what do I do? I told him. Step by step. I didn't rush. I didn't simplify it too much. He needed to understand what he was stepping into. He thanked me 3 times before hanging up. At noon, HR emailed me to confirm my severance details. 2 months' pay, COBRA paperwork, a final paycheck processed on Friday. Standard, they called it. I forwarded the email to my lawyer without comment. By Tuesday, the tone changed. The CFO called me directly this time, skipping pleasantries. We appreciate your cooperation, he said. It's making this transition much smoother. I'm glad, I replied. There was a pause. We may need you to come in briefly, just to walk through some things in person. Happy to, I said. Let me know when. I could almost hear the relief in his exhale. When I walked back into the building that afternoon, security waved me through without hesitation. Old habits die hard. People nodded as I passed, unsure whether to treat me as former staff or something undefined. The nephew met me in the hallway, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He looked tired. I didn't realize how much was interconnected, he admitted as we walked. It usually is, I said. In the conference room, the board listened as I explained workflows they'd never bothered to learn. Dependencies, vendor risks, the difference between growth and overextension. No one interrupted me. For the first time, they were taking notes. Afterward, the CFO clasped his hands together. You've been incredibly professional about all this, he said. We hope there are no hard feelings. I met his eyes. I believe in clean endings. That night, my lawyer called. They haven't contested anything yet, she said, which means they're either unaware or assuming you won't act. They'll assume the latter, I replied. Then timing matters, she said. Your option window is tight. We'll need to move decisively. I know. By Wednesday, rumors started circulating. A former colleague texted me. They're struggling. He approved something he shouldn't have. Another message followed an hour later. CFO's been in meetings all day. Tense. I didn't respond. Information was flowing to me without effort now. That always happens when people think you're already gone. That afternoon, the nephew sent me a calendar invite. Subject: quick sync duration, 30 minutes. When the call started, he didn't turn on his camera. I want to be honest, he said. This is harder than I expected. I waited. They keep asking me questions I don't know how to answer, he continued. And I don't want to mess this up. There it was. Not arrogance, anxiety. I'm doing my best, he added. But if you ever wanted to consult, temporarily? I leaned back in my chair. I'll think about it, I said. By Thursday, the CFO's tone shifted again. Less warmth, more urgency. "We're finalizing next quarter's projections," he said. "There are discrepancies. You're familiar with the assumptions behind them." "Yes," I said. "I built them." "Could you send over your rationale?" "I can," I replied, "but I'd prefer to walk through it live." "Of course," he said quickly. "Whatever you need." That evening, I signed the notice of intent to exercise my buyback option. My lawyer handled the filings. Proper channels, proper notice, no drama. Friday morning, I watched the delivery confirmation come through. Received, 9:12 a.m. By 9:30, my phone started ringing. I let it go to voicemail. By the end of the week, the company believed I was helping them survive their own decision. They thought cooperation meant compliance. They were wrong. I wasn't helping them transition past me. I was documenting everything they did without me. And when Monday came again, they would finally understand the difference. The first sign they'd noticed something was wrong came at 9:47 a.m. on Monday. My lawyer forwarded me a single-line email from the company's outside counsel requesting an informal discussion regarding contractual matters. Informal, in legal language, usually means someone just realized they missed something important and is hoping you'll be generous about it. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I joined the video call the nephew had scheduled earlier that morning. His camera was on this time. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Thanks for making time," he said quickly. "We're reviewing historical agreements and a few things aren't lining up." "That happens," I replied. "There's a provision in your old employment contract," he continued, glancing off screen. "Something about equity." I waited. Silence is useful when people are nervous. "The CFO thinks it's outdated," he added, "or possibly superseded by later agreements." "I'm sure your legal team will sort it out," I said. He swallowed. "They're asking whether you intend to act on it." "I already have," I replied. The call ended shortly after that. At 10:30, the CFO called. No greeting this time. "Maria," he said, his voice tight, "we received a notice from your attorney." "Yes." "You want to exercise a buyback option," he said, as if saying it out loud might make it sound less real. "That's correct." "That clause was never meant for a situation like this," he snapped. "You were compensated fairly, promoted, trusted. None of which negates termination without cause," I said evenly. "You're exploiting a technicality," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm enforcing an agreement your company drafted and signed." There was a pause, longer this time. "We need to discuss valuation," he said finally. "I agree," I said. "That's in the clause too." By noon, a meeting invite appeared on my calendar. Emergency board session. Outside counsel present. I attended remotely. The screen filled with familiar faces, all of them tense. The nephew sat slightly off to the side, silent. The lawyer spoke first. "The company's position is that the buyback provision is ambiguous." "It isn't," my lawyer replied. "It's conditional. The condition was met." Another board member leaned forward. "You can't possibly believe this entitles you to reclaim equity at the original price." "It entitles me to reclaim it at the formula specified," I said. "Which you approved." The CFO rubbed his temples. "This could destabilize the company." "Terminating institutional knowledge usually does," I said. That didn't land well. They proposed a settlement, a cash payment in exchange for waiving the clause. It was generous by normal standards. It was also inadequate. "I'm not interested," I said. By Tuesday, the pressure campaign began. HR sent a follow-up clarifying that my access to internal systems would be terminated to protect sensitive data. A courtesy warning. Former colleagues stopped texting. The nephew emailed once, then unsent it. My lawyer updated me that the company had retained a second firm. "They're taking this seriously now," she said. "Expect a narrative shift." She was right. An industry blog published a short piece questioning whether legacy contracts could threaten corporate stability. No names mentioned, no sources cited. I forwarded it to my lawyer. She replied with one word: predictable. On Wednesday, I was invited to another call. This time, only legal teams. The company's counsel argued that the CEO's death altered the spirit of the agreement, that market conditions had changed, that enforcing the clause now would be unfair to shareholders. My lawyer responded with documents, board minutes, emails, a signed amendment reaffirming the clause 3 years earlier. The CFO had signed that one himself. I watched his face on the screen as the realization settled. Thursday morning, the nephew called again. "They're asking me to testify," he said quietly, "about your role, your performance." I chose my words carefully. "You should tell the truth." "That you did more than me?" he asked. "That I did my job," I replied. "And now you're doing yours." He nodded, then hesitated. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," I said. By Friday, the company's tone shifted from aggressive to procedural. They sent a formal acknowledgement of my exercised option, subject to review, subject to confirmation, subject to delay, but not denial. The market noticed something was happening. Analysts started asking questions on earnings calls. Why were decisions being postponed? Why hadn't leadership announced a long-term strategy? Uncertainty has a way of surfacing. That evening, I reviewed the original contract again. The clause was simple, elegant, ruthless in its clarity. Termination without cause triggered my right to repurchase a defined equity stake at a predetermined valuation. No emotion, no interpretation, just math. On Sunday night, my lawyer called. "They'll try to slow walk this," she said, "but they can't stop it." "What about retaliation?" I asked. "They're constrained," she replied. "Anything overt strengthens your position." I hung up and sat in the quiet of my apartment. They had replaced me because it was easy. Now they were learning that undoing me was not. And Monday, for the second time, was going to be very interesting. The injunction landed on Tuesday morning. Not dramatic, not public. Just a court-stamped order delivered to the company's legal inbox at 8:13 a.m., freezing any equity restructuring, executive compensation changes, or asset transfers until the buyback process was resolved. By 8:20, my phone was ringing. I let it ring. At 8:41, my lawyer called instead. "It's granted," she said. "Narrow, clean, exactly what we asked for." "Good," I replied. "They're furious." "I expected that." By the time I made coffee, the company was effectively stuck. No bonuses, no accelerated stock grants, no golden handshakes. The things leadership relied on to smooth over chaos were suddenly unavailable. At 9:05, the CFO emailed me directly. Subject, urgent, need alignment. Text, "Maria, this path is damaging everyone involved. We should speak today." I didn't respond. At 9:30, the nephew tried again. "I think they underestimated how serious this was," he said, voice low. "They're scrambling." "They usually do," I said. "They're asking me to sign off on decisions I don't fully understand," he continued. "And now legal says we can't move on anything." I paused. "That's what happens when governance breaks down." He sighed. "What do you actually want?" I didn't answer immediately. "I want the agreement honored," I said finally. "Nothing more." That afternoon, the board convened without inviting me. It didn't matter. Under the injunction, they couldn't act meaningfully anyway. What they could do was argue. And they did. By Wednesday, my lawyer forwarded internal emails produced in discovery. Not privileged, sloppy, written in haste. One board member questioned whether firing me had been necessary at all. Another asked whether HR had documented any cause. Someone else replied that it felt like the right moment. That email would matter later. The CFO, meanwhile, was trying to reframe the story. He called investors individually, assuring them the situation was contained, that it was a legacy issue, that leadership remained stable, but investors read filings, and they noticed when companies stopped making moves. On Thursday, an analyst note circulated quietly. Governance uncertainty may present downside risk. It wasn't accusatory. It was worse. It was cautious. That same day, the nephew resigned. He didn't announce it publicly. He sent a short internal note thanking everyone for the opportunity and citing personal reasons. He called me an hour later. "I can't be the face of this," he said. "It was never supposed to turn into a legal war." "I understand," I replied. "I told them I wouldn't testify against you," he added, "or for them." "That was wise," I said. With his exit, the CFO's position weakened significantly. The replacement they'd rushed through was gone, and the role was vacant again. Only this time, the court order prevented them from appointing anyone new. By Friday, the company had a leadership gap it couldn't legally fill. That's when the tone changed. The CFO requested mediation. Not a call. Not an email. Formal mediation. I agreed. The mediator was neutral, experienced, and unimpressed by emotion. She asked for positions, not speeches. The company offered to accelerate severance, increase the settlement, add consulting fees. I declined. They suggested modifying the clause retroactively. My lawyer smiled politely. "That would require her consent," she said, "which she does not give." After 3 hours, the mediator leaned back. "What if the buyback proceeds?" she asked, "and the company retains you in an interim capacity?" Silence filled the room. I spoke carefully. "Under what authority?" The CFO cleared his throat. "We'd need to restructure governance." "Including the board," I said. "Yes," he admitted. "And operational control during the transition," I added. Another pause. "We could discuss that," he said. That was the moment I knew they were out of options. By Sunday evening, my lawyer confirmed what we'd been working toward. The valuation formula had been triggered. The numbers were locked. Funding mechanisms identified. Timelines enforceable. "They can delay," she said. "But every delay costs them leverage." "And credibility," I added. Monday morning, I walked past the building again. Lights were on in offices that should have been empty. Crisis hours, emergency meetings, the kind of week that exposes who actually understands the business. I didn't go inside. At noon, the CFO called one last time. "We misjudged you," he said quietly. No anger now, just fatigue. "Yes," I replied. "If this goes through," he continued, "the board will need to answer for it." "They should," I said. A long pause. "What happens to us?" he asked. I looked out the window, watching traffic move steadily below. "That depends," I said, "on how well you read the agreement you ignored." That night, my lawyer sent the final draft of the enforcement motion, ready to file. Monday had arrived again, and this time, there would be no ambiguity about who controlled what came next. The agreement was executed on a Wednesday morning. No press release, no announcement, just signatures, wire confirmations, and a quiet email from my lawyer that said, "Funds received. Equity transfer complete." 15 years ago, I'd signed my first contract in a borrowed office with folding chairs and a borrowed printer. That morning, I signed the final document from my kitchen table. Coffee untouched. City still waking up outside my window. By 9:30 a.m., I owned the stake the clause guaranteed me. By 10, the board knew. The CFO called immediately. His voice was flat now, stripped of urgency and strategy. The transfer went through. "Yes," I said. "We're convening an emergency meeting." "I'll attend," I replied. "Send the details." This time, no one questioned my presence when I walked into the building. Security didn't wave me through out of habit. They waved me through because legal had instructed them to. The boardroom looked smaller than I remembered. Same table, same skyline. Fewer people. The CFO sat at the head, but he didn't look settled there anymore. 2 board members avoided my eyes. One nodded stiffly. "We'll begin," he said. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Counsel summarized the situation clinically. The buyback clause had been lawfully exercised. The injunction remained in effect until governance was clarified. The company now had a significant shareholder whose consent was required for material decisions. That shareholder was me. "We need stability," the CFO said finally. Investors are nervous, staff are asking questions. So am I said. He looked up. About what? About why this was allowed to happen, I replied. Why 15 years of operational leadership was replaced by a rushed decision with no cause, no documentation, and no succession plan. No one answered. I'm not interested in theatrics, I continued. I'm interested in continuity. But continuity requires accountability. One board member shifted. What are you proposing, Maria? I'm proposing what should have happened before the termination, I said. An interim operating structure, clear authority, and a board that understands the business it oversees. The CFO leaned back. And where does that leave us? I met his gaze. That depends on how useful you intend to be. Silence followed, not hostile, resigned. We broke for a brief recess. When we reconvened, my lawyer joined remotely. The revised governance framework was circulated. Temporary operating authority, defined decision rights, a timeline for board review. No one argued the language. They had exhausted their appetite for risk. By early afternoon, it was done. I wasn't reinstated. Titles were irrelevant now. But I was granted interim authority to oversee operations while a formal leadership review took place. The CFO retained his role. Narrowed. Supervised. The irony wasn't lost on him. At 3:17 p.m., an internal memo went out. To all staff. Effective immediately, Maria Alvarez will assume interim operational authority. Further updates will follow. My phone buzzed with messages. Some congratulatory. Some cautious. Some simply relieved. One text stood out. I didn't think they'd ever admit they were wrong. No, neither did I. By the end of the day, I was sitting alone in an office I hadn't occupied in weeks. Not my old one. A neutral space. Clean. Functional. Temporary. The work waiting for me wasn't glamorous. Vendor calls, budget reviews, stabilizing teams who had been whiplashed by indecision. This wasn't revenge. It was repair. Late that evening, the CFO knocked on the door. I wanted to say something, he said. I gestured for him to sit. We thought loyalty meant permanence, he continued, that you'd always be here, that you wouldn't push back. I didn't, I said, until I had to. He nodded. We miscalculated. Yes, I replied again. He stood to leave, then paused. What happens next? I considered the question. Next, I said, we do the work you tried to skip. When he left, I stayed a while longer. The building was quiet, familiar in a way that no longer hurt. They had replaced me because it was convenient. They had underestimated me because it was comfortable. And they had learned, too late, that experience doesn't disappear just because you stop paying it. That night, as I turned off the lights and walked out, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. Control, I realized, isn't about winning an argument or humiliating the people who wronged you. It's about having the leverage to decide what happens next, and the discipline to use it properly. They had fired me to move on. Instead, they gave me the final say. And that was enough.